The transmission came without warning. Across every screen, radio frequency, and satellite network, the same message broadcast in flawless English, laced with a deep, artificial resonance. The figure on the screen was not a being of flesh and blood, but a cold, towering holographic projection of a humanoid figure clad in ornate silver armor. A flowing crimson mantle draped from his shoulders, and a crown of shifting metal adorned his elongated skull. His violet eyes, inhuman and piercing, swept over the silent world below. "I am High Sovereign Kelser of the Galactic Empire. Your world has been selected for assimilation. Surrender your governance, dismantle your defenses, and submit. Resistance will not be tolerated." The message repeated, but humanity had already heard enough. Deep beneath the Pentagon, in a war room brimming with tension, President Elias Monroe leaned over the steel table, his fingers digging into the cold surface. His silver-streaked hair was damp with sweat, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. Around him, generals, scientists, and intelligence officials traded frantic whispers, their faces pale. A general cleared his throat. "Mr. President, our orbital defenses are decades behind anything that size. Their fleet eclipses ours in both numbers and firepower. If they strike, Earth will not withstand it. And yet, they demand surrender first," Monroe murmured. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of the moment. "They expect compliance. They think we're already beaten." A moment of silence. Then, across the table, a voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "They're not the first empire to make that mistake." Colonel Adrian Kovacs, decorated veteran of the Martian insurrection, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed over her dark uniform. Her olive-toned face was unreadable, but her sharp eyes flicked to Monroe. "They assume technological superiority is all that matters. They've never fought humans." Monroe turned to General Bradford, the head of the Joint Defense Command. "How long until they attack?" "Unknown," Bradford admitted. "But they wouldn't give us time if they didn't expect an easy victory. They'll move methodically, secure orbit, take key installations, neutralize resistance." A slow squeeze. Monroe nodded. "Then we strike first." The room stilled. A scientist, young and nervous, stammered, "Mr. President, with all due respect, their fleet is beyond anything." "We don't need to outgun them," Kovacs interrupted. "We need to outfight them." Monroe gestured for her to continue. She leaned forward. "They rely on energy weapons, shielding, and automated warfare. We use kinetic weapons, old-fashioned slug throwers, and guerrilla tactics. Their shields deflect plasma, but they won't stop a depleted uranium round moving at Mach 5. Bradford's brow furrowed. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we fight dirty. They expect a conventional war. We give them hell." A silence stretched across the room. Then Monroe exhaled sharply, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then let's get to work." The first Imperial landers descended over the ruins of Hong Kong. Massive, beetle-like craft unfolded their legs and released squadrons of faceless enforcers, 2 meters tall, sleek and featureless, their armor glistening beneath the city's shattered skyline. Their weapons hummed with a low, menacing whine as they moved in calculated unison, clearing streets, securing vantage points. Overhead, Imperial gunships loomed like silent predators. The first wave met no resistance. Then, on a seemingly empty street, a sewer grate shifted. A soldier in battered urban camo emerged, dragging a shoulder-mounted launcher into position. His helmet visor reflected the advancing alien infantry. No hesitation. He fired. The rocket tore through the lead enforcer's chest, sending shards of white-hot metal and shattered circuits flying. Before the rest could react, dozens of hidden figures emerged from alleyways, abandoned storefronts, and rooftops, unloading everything they had. The enforcers adapted fast. They formed a defensive line, their energy shields flickering as they absorbed incoming gunfire. But then the snipers opened up. .50 caliber rounds punched through their armored skulls, splattering glowing fluid across cracked asphalt. The enforcers fell. But the sky darkened. Gunships pivoted. Their weapons charged. Then, from atop a collapsed skyscraper, a human voice shouted into a radio. "Now!" From a parking structure across the street, An old industrial crane groaned. The electromagnetic pulse bomb strapped to its rusted frame detonated, bathing the entire block in crackling energy. The gunships flickered, their control systems failing, their engines stuttering. A second rocket streaked into the sky. One gunship exploded in a blinding inferno. The others veered wildly, struggling to regain control. From the tunnels, from the rubble, from the depths of a city the Empire thought already conquered, humanity rose. The ambush had lasted mere minutes, but it sent a message. Earth was not surrendering. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship Omen's Will, Admiral Vale stood rigid as he reviewed the battle feed. The enforcers had been obliterated. The landing zone was compromised. A lesser being might have shown frustration. Vale merely turned, his silvery eyes narrowing. Deploy the second wave. Increase firepower. No more warnings. Back on Earth, President Monroe watched the battle unfold from a secure military bunker. The footage was grainy, shaking with each distant explosion. He saw his people fight, saw them bleed, but they were winning. For now. Monroe turned to General Bradford. What's our next move? Bradford hesitated. Then he tapped a holomap of Earth. Red zones blinked, confirmed enemy deployments. Blue zones, resistance strongholds. The map was bleeding red. We make them pay for every inch of soil, Bradford said grimly. But we can't win a war just defending. If we want to survive, we take the fight to them. Kovacs smirked, loading a fresh magazine into her rifle. Then let's stop playing defense. Humanity had made its choice. The Galactic Empire declared war. Earth loaded their shotgun. The skies above Earth burned with streaks of fire as debris from fallen Imperial ships rained down, painting the atmosphere with brief, violent flashes of light. The war had escalated beyond anything the Galactic Empire had anticipated. What should have been a swift and efficient conquest had turned into a grueling, bloody campaign. Humanity was not merely resisting, they were winning battles. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. And in war, momentum was everything. From high orbit, Admiral Vale observed the planet below, his hands clasped behind his back. The Bridge of Omens will pulsed with quiet efficiency as officers processed battle data, adjusting strategies, predicting movements. The humans fought like primitives, but there was a ruthless efficiency to their savagery, a refusal to break even in the face of overwhelming force. The concept of surrender seemed alien to them. Vale's second-in-command, Subcommander Rithos, approached cautiously. Admiral, losses are increasing. We've secured several territories, but resistance movements are spreading. Even occupied zones refuse to submit. Vale did not turn. His gaze remained locked on the blue planet below. Their kind lacks the wisdom to recognize inevitability. They have no empire, no fleet of their own, yet they fight as if they believe they can win. His voice was calm, measured. It is time we educate them. On the lunar surface, inside a hastily fortified command post, Colonel Adrian Kovacs crouched beside a display of the ongoing battles across the solar system. The war had outgrown Earth. The Empire, recognizing the stubbornness of its new adversary, had expanded its operations, seeking to isolate and crush human strongholds beyond the planet itself. The Moon, Mars, and the asteroid belt had become battlegrounds. Kovacs traced her finger along the holographic map, marking critical engagements. A convoy of Imperial supply ships was en route from a staging ground near Europa. If humanity wanted to sustain the fight, they needed those supplies. A direct confrontation with the escort fleet would be suicide. But Kovacs never intended to fight fair. Her earpiece crackled. Commander Kovacs, we're in position. She tapped the device. Hold. Wait for my mark. Aboard the stolen Imperial cruiser Blackout, Captain Elias Ash Mercer exhaled a slow breath. The ship was a miracle, a captured Imperial warship, heavily damaged but still operational. It had taken months to reverse engineer enough of its systems to operate effectively, but now it was humanity's most dangerous weapon, a ghost hiding in plain sight. They had drifted for hours, engines powered down, disguised as debris. The convoy was nearly in range. Targets locked, Mercer murmured. Weapons hot. Kovacs' voice came through. Engage. Blackout came alive in an instant, weapons cycling as its cloaking field flickered off. In the span of seconds, torpedoes launched, streaking toward the escort ships before they had a chance to react. The first explosion sent a ripple through the convoy, tearing a hole through the lead destroyer's hull. The second ignited the fuel cells of a supply hauler, reducing it to a ball of fire. On the bridge of the remaining Imperial warship, alarms shrieked. The captain barely had time to register the ambush before something new filled his view, jagged chunks of rock moving fast. Mercer had timed it perfectly. The asteroid belt, seemingly empty, erupted as human strike teams activated magnetic rail cannons, hurling asteroids the size of tanks directly into the convoy. Shields flared, failed, and hulls shattered as the Empire's supply line disintegrated under the sheer force of raw physics. From behind a cluster of drifting ice, Kovac's second team emerged, piloting repurposed mining vessels outfitted with crude but effective boarding spikes. They latched onto the damaged ships, cutting into their hulls like parasites. Inside the blackout, Mercer watched the chaos unfold, his lips twisting into a grin. The Empire was built for war in open space, for battles dictated by fleet formations and technological superiority. But here, in the cold darkness, where the fight was dirty and personal, humanity thrived. Targets neutralized, came the report from Kovacs. "We're securing the cargo." "Copy that," Mercer said, leaning back. "Hope the Empire enjoys starving." But the Empire did not starve easily. Days later, in the skies over Mars, humanity suffered its first true defeat. The Red Planet's defenses had been meager, its colonies never built for war. When the Empire struck, it did so with the full weight of its fury. Orbital bombardments turned entire settlements to ash, and resistance fighters, outgunned and outmatched, were cut down with ruthless efficiency. The survivors, those who managed to escape the slaughter, fled into the tunnels of abandoned mining networks, their communications sporadic, their hope dwindling. When news reached Earth, silence filled the war room. President Monroe sat motionless, staring at the reports. The loss of Mars was a brutal reminder that for all their victories, humanity was still on the back foot. Their enemies were vast, their forces endless. General Bradford exhaled slowly. "We need to hit back. Hard." "We will," Kovacs said, arms crossed. "We just need to make them bleed for every inch." Bradford eyed her. "How?" She smirked. "We take a page from history. We turn this into a war of attrition." Monroe leaned forward. "Explain." "We make them pay for their victories. No clean battles, no decisive conquests. We turn every occupied zone into a hell's cape. We sabotage, we starve their forces, we strike and fade. They want a clean war? We give them insurgency." Monroe nodded slowly. "Make it happen." And so, Earth burned, but it did not fall. As the Imperial forces tightened their grip, humanity adapted, striking from the shadows, disrupting supply chains, ambushing patrols. The war was no longer fought on battlefields. It was fought in the ruins of cities, in the craters of the moon, in the drifting silence of asteroid fields. The Galactic Empire had declared war. But they had underestimated their enemy. And they were beginning to realize their mistake. The ruins of Berlin smoldered under a sky choked with ash. Once a proud city, it was now a graveyard of shattered buildings and crumbling monuments, its streets littered with the wreckage of war. The Empire had taken it, but they had not conquered it. Shadows moved between the skeletal remains of skyscrapers, figures darting unseen through underground tunnels, their presence felt only in the aftermath of sudden, brutal ambushes. Every day, the occupying forces bled. From a concealed outpost beneath the ruins of the Reichstag, Colonel Adrian Kovacs studied the latest intelligence reports. Resistance cells in occupied zones were multiplying, striking harder, vanishing faster. The Empire had overwhelming numbers, but humans had patience, ingenuity, and a deep, unshakable hatred for their invaders. A comm link crackled. "This is Echo Team. We've intercepted an Imperial supply drop near the Tiergarten sector. Bringing in weapons and rations." "Understood." "Any casualties?" Kovacs asked, keeping her voice steady. A pause. "We lost Simmons." She closed her eyes for a moment. Another name to add to the list. No time for grief. Copy that. Stay mobile. She cut the transmission and turned to the man sitting across from her. Captain Elias Ash Mercer, battered but grinning, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. We're making progress. Kovacs exhaled. Not fast enough. Mercer shrugged. We're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. I'd say dragging this war out is already a win. Dragging it out isn't enough, she snapped. We have to break them. Mercer's grin faded. And how do you propose we do that? She placed a tablet on the table, its screen displaying orbital schematics. Mercer frowned as he recognized the layout. That's Omen's will. Kovacs nodded. Their command ship. It's where Admiral Vale oversees the entire war effort. Cut off the head, and we send a message. Mercer whistled. Hell of a target. You planning to just walk in and ask them politely to hand it over? She leaned forward. We've been capturing and reverse engineering their tech for months. We know how their security works. We can get a team aboard. And if we disable their command network, we throw the entire fleet into chaos. Mercer stared at her, then exhaled. Suicidal. Reckless. He grinned. I love it. 2 days later, under the cover of an asteroid field, a stolen Imperial transport drifted toward Omen's will. Disguised transponder codes bought them passage past the first layer of security. The rest would come down to timing and luck. Inside the transport, Kovacs, Mercer, and a team of elite resistance fighters waited in silence. Their armor was a mix of repurposed Imperial gear and scavenged human materials. Each carried weapons carefully chosen for the mission, silent, deadly, efficient. The docking clamps engaged with a dull thud. A moment later, the airlock hissed open. They moved fast, silent as ghosts, slipping past patrolling enforcers. The corridors of Omen's will asterisk were pristine, metallic, sterile, so different from the war-torn ruins they had fought in for months. Kovacs checked her tracker. Command center is 3 levels up. Keep it quiet. They advanced, taking out guards with precise, brutal efficiency. Blades slid between armor joints. Suppressed rounds punched through helmets. No alarms. No mistakes. Then, as they reached the final corridor, the doors at the end slid open. Admiral Vale stepped through. He did not flinch, did not look surprised. His silver eyes swept over the intruders, taking in their weapons, their armor, their intent. Kovacs raised her rifle. Vale simply smiled. Then the lights cut out. In an instant, the corridor was bathed in red emergency glow. A klaxon blared. From the walls, hidden panels slid open, and Imperial enforcers poured in, weapons raised. It seems, Vale said, voice smooth as ever, that you have underestimated me. Kovacs fired first. The shot went wide as Vale moved with impossible speed, ducking into the shadows. The enforcers opened fire. The corridor erupted into chaos. Mercer grabbed Kovacs and dragged her behind cover. We are so damn screwed. Kovacs gritted her teeth, slamming a fresh magazine into her rifle. Not yet. They had come too far to fail. One way or another, this war would end tonight. Gunfire tore through the corridor, sparks and smoke filling the air as Kovacs and her team returned fire. The Imperial enforcers moved with cold precision, but humanity had mastered the art of fighting dirty. Grenades arced through the chaos, detonating in bursts of shrapnel and concussive force. Screams echoed, but the Empire did not falter. They pressed forward, their armor absorbing bullets, their movements coordinated and relentless. Kovacs ducked behind a fallen enforcer, reloading with practiced speed. We need to move, she shouted over the cacophony. Mercer slammed a fresh power cell into his rifle, popping up just long enough to fire a controlled burst into an officer's exposed visor. You think, he growled. The plan had gone to hell in seconds. They were pinned down, their path to the command center blocked, and Admiral Vale had vanished into the shadows. New plan? Mercer asked, panting. Kovacs scanned the hallway. Dead bodies, flickering consoles, the distant thud of boots as reinforcements closed in. The ship's internal security system had locked down most escape routes. They weren't leaving unless they finished what they came to do. She tapped her wrist console, pulling up a schematic. Ventilation shafts lead to the primary power core. Mercer stared at her. Blowing the power core? That's not an escape plan. That's suicide. She met his gaze, unflinching. Not if we set a controlled overload. Take out their command functions. Cripple the fleet. We might not make it, but neither will they. Mercer exhaled. Hell of a way to go. The remaining resistance fighters didn't hesitate. One by one, they forced their way into the narrow maintenance tunnels, crawling toward the ship's beating heart. Behind them, alarms blared. The Empire knew they were coming. By the time they dropped into the core chamber, the enemy was already waiting. Rows of enforcers stood on raised platforms, weapons trained on the intruders. At the center of it all, flanked by elite guards, was Admiral Vale. He stood calm, untouched by the violence, his silver eyes cold and unreadable. Kovacs raised her rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. Vale merely tilted his head. "You do not belong here." "Neither do you," she shot back. He smiled. "And yet, here we are." Then he moved. Kovacs barely registered the blur of motion before he was upon them. A blade carved through the air, slicing into one of her fighters before a shot rang out. Mercer, firing from the hip, forcing Vale to retreat. But the damage was done. Blood spattered across the floor. The battle was swift and brutal. Enforcers rained down fire from above while Kovacs and her team weaved through the machinery, using the towering power conduits as cover. Mercer fought like a man possessed, twin pistols spitting death as he carved a path toward the controls. Kovacs followed, vaulting over a railing, landing hard on the platform where Vale stood. The Admiral turned to her, blade dripping, expression unreadable. She lunged. They clashed, her combat knife against his impossibly fast strikes. He was stronger, faster, more precise. Every move was calculated, every strike meant to kill. But Kovacs wasn't fighting for skill. She was fighting to win. She took the hit, his blade slicing across her side. Pain flared, but she drove forward, slamming her knife into the gap between his ribs. Vale staggered. His silver eyes widened ever so slightly. Mercer reached the console, slamming a detonator onto the panel. Timers set. 30 seconds. Vale coughed, blood on his lips. "You..." Kovacs ripped the knife free and kicked him back. "See you in hell." The core rumbled. Lights flickered. The ship began to shake. Kovacs turned, grabbing Mercer by the arm as they sprinted for the exit. The last of their team covered them, holding back the enforcers as the overload sequence hit critical. They dove into an escape chute just as the explosion roared. Fire and light consumed the chamber. The ship lurched, its spine breaking as cascading detonations rippled outward. Kovacs never saw Vale hit the ground. They tumbled through zero gravity, the blast hurling them into the void. The stolen Imperial shuttle was waiting, its hatch open, desperate hands pulling them inside as the wreckage of omens will split apart behind them. The Galactic Empire's flagship was dead. The Resistance had won their greatest victory. But as Kovacs lay on the cold floor of the shuttle, bleeding, breath shallow, she couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. She closed her eyes. For now, it was enough.